Southeast Asian leaders gathered for a high-level regional summit. Global tensions, economic uncertainty, and rising geopolitical rivalry dominated the conversation. Against that backdrop, Philippine President Ferdinand Jr. delivered remarks that quickly captured international attention, particularly as nations across Asia continue trying to balance relations between the United States and China. The summit came at a delicate moment for the region. Conflicts overseas have disrupted energy markets, maritime disputes continue to fuel tensions in Asian waters, and countries throughout Southeast Asia are increasingly facing pressure from competing global powers. Leaders arrived with growing concerns about regional security, economic stability, and the future role of ASEAN in an increasingly divided world. During the discussions, Marcos focused heavily on the importance of sovereignty, regional cooperation, and diplomatic independence. His message reflected a broader sentiment emerging among several Southeast Asian nations that do not want to become trapped in the middle of major power competition. In one of the summit's most closely watched moments, Marcos declared, "No nation should feel that it must choose between powers." The statement immediately stood out because it directly addressed one of the most sensitive geopolitical issues facing the region today. Southeast Asian nations have deep economic ties with China while also maintaining important security partnerships with the United States. As tensions between Washington and Beijing continue to grow, governments across the region are increasingly trying to avoid being forced into taking sides. Marcos made it clear that ASEAN countries want the freedom to pursue their own national interests without outside pressure. He emphasized that regional stability depends on cooperation, mutual respect, and maintaining open relationships with all major powers. The Philippine president stressed that ASEAN's strength comes from unity and independence. According to him, the region should not allow external rivalries to divide member states or weaken regional cooperation. His remarks reflected growing concern that geopolitical competition is beginning to reshape the political and economic landscape across Asia. From trade routes to military partnerships, nearly every major issue in the region is now being viewed through the lens of global strategic rivalry. Throughout the summit, leaders also discussed the impact of ongoing conflicts in other parts of the world, particularly on energy supplies and inflation. Several ASEAN countries remain vulnerable to disruptions in global shipping and fuel markets, making regional economies highly sensitive to instability abroad. Marcos acknowledged those concerns directly and said governments are now exploring ways to strengthen regional coordination on energy security and economic resilience. While addressing the issue, he explained that ASEAN members are carefully studying how to minimize the effects of international crises on their own populations. "We're trying to examine everything we can do," he said, while discussing efforts to respond to growing economic pressure caused by global instability. The summit also focused heavily on maritime security, particularly tensions in the South China Sea. The Philippines has repeatedly raised concerns over confrontations involving Chinese vessels in disputed waters, an issue that continues to strain relations in the region. Despite those tensions, Marcos avoided overly confrontational language during the summit. Instead, he emphasized the importance of diplomacy, dialogue, and adherence to international law. He argued that disputes should be resolved peacefully and that regional stability must remain the top priority for all countries involved. That careful balancing act reflects the broader strategy now being pursued by many ASEAN governments. While countries in the region continue strengthening security cooperation with the United States, they also rely heavily on China economically. As a result, leaders are increasingly cautious about appearing too closely aligned with either side. Marcos' comments appeared designed to reinforce ASEAN's long-standing position of strategic neutrality. The Philippine president stressed that Southeast Asia should not become a battleground for global power struggles. Instead, he called for stronger regional unity and greater cooperation on shared challenges, including economic recovery, food security, disaster response, and maritime safety. Observers noted that the speech was significant not only because of what Marcos said, but also because of the timing. Global polarization has intensified in recent years, and smaller nations are increasingly feeling pressure to navigate a rapidly changing geopolitical environment. For ASEAN countries, the challenge is particularly complex. China remains one of the region's largest trading partners and a major source of investment. At the same time, the United States continues to play a critical role in regional defense and security partnerships. The Philippines itself has become a key example of that balancing act. Under Marcos, Manila has expanded military cooperation with Washington while simultaneously maintaining diplomatic and economic engagement with Beijing. That dual-track approach reflects the reality facing many governments across Southeast Asia. Leaders are trying to protect national interests without becoming overly dependent on any single global power. During the summit, Marcos repeatedly returned to the theme of independent decision-making. He argued that every country should have the right to pursue relationships based on its own priorities rather than external pressure. No nation should feel that it must choose between powers, he repeated, reinforcing the central message of his speech. The statement resonated across the summit because many ASEAN nations share similar concerns about preserving strategic flexibility. Leaders also discussed the importance of protecting international trade routes and ensuring freedom of navigation in regional waters. Southeast Asia sits at the center of some of the world's busiest maritime corridors, making stability in the region essential for global commerce. Any escalation in regional tensions could have serious economic consequences far beyond Asia. Because of that, ASEAN leaders stressed the need for de-escalation and peaceful diplomacy. The summit additionally addressed the ongoing crisis in Myanmar, which continues to pose one of the biggest internal challenges for ASEAN. Political instability and conflict inside Myanmar have complicated regional diplomacy for years, with member states still struggling to reach a unified approach. Marcos urged continued dialogue and humanitarian engagement, emphasizing the importance of regional cooperation in addressing the crisis. At the same time, leaders acknowledged that divisions within ASEAN itself could weaken the bloc's ability to respond effectively to major challenges. That concern helped shape much of the summit's messaging. Throughout the discussions, there was a strong emphasis on maintaining ASEAN's relevance and unity at a time when international politics are becoming increasingly polarized. Marcos argued that ASEAN's collective voice becomes stronger when member states work together, rather than allowing outside rivalries to create internal divisions. He said the region must remain focused on cooperation, economic development, and long-term stability. The Philippine president also highlighted the importance of preparing for future economic shocks. Rising energy costs, inflation, and uncertainty in global markets have placed additional pressure on developing economies throughout Southeast Asia. Leaders discussed possible measures to improve regional resilience, including stronger energy coordination and expanded economic cooperation. Marcos stressed that ASEAN countries need to become more prepared for external disruptions that could affect trade, food supplies, and energy access. Despite the serious challenges discussed during the summit, leaders also attempted to project optimism about the region's future. ASEAN remains one of the fastest-growing economic regions in the world, and governments across Southeast Asia continue seeking opportunities for deeper cooperation and development. Still, the summit made clear that geopolitical tensions remain a major concern. As competition between global powers intensifies, countries throughout the region are trying to avoid becoming caught in the middle of conflicts they did not create. Marcos' remarks reflected that anxiety directly. Rather than choosing confrontation, he emphasized diplomacy and coexistence. Rather than division, he called for unity. Analysts noted that the speech was carefully calibrated to reassure multiple audiences at once. It reaffirmed the Philippines' commitment to international regional partnerships, while also signaling that ASEAN nations value independence and strategic balance. The comments were also seen as part of a broader regional trend. Across Southeast Asia, governments are increasingly emphasizing sovereignty and neutrality as they navigate a rapidly shifting global order. Many leaders believe maintaining flexibility is essential for protecting both economic growth and national security. At the summit, Marcos framed ASEAN unity as the region's best defense against instability and external pressure. He warned that division within the bloc could weaken Southeast Asia's ability to respond to future crises. Instead, he argued that countries must continue working together to preserve peace and stability. The Philippine president also stressed that smaller nations deserve respect in international affairs and should not be forced into geopolitical competition between larger powers. That message became one of the defining themes of the summit as discussions continued. Behind closed doors, leaders repeatedly emphasized the importance of dialogue, diplomacy, and regional cooperation. The summit ultimately highlighted how much the global political landscape is changing and how carefully Southeast Asian nations are trying to navigate those changes. While the world's major powers continue competing for influence, ASEAN countries appear increasingly determined to maintain their own independent path. And through all the discussions surrounding security, trade, energy, and diplomacy, one statement remained at the center of attention: no nation should feel that it must choose between powers.